Lawyers of Reddit, what was the weirdest case you worked on? Story 1. I had a case where the plaintiff told me he caught Adolf Hitler and that he won the Medal of Honor. His attorney missed court a lot, once because her pet duck had a nostril infection. The transaction was for approximately $6 million, and when I asked him whether he had applied for financial help, he stated that had asked an Irishman for a loan. He could not identify the specific Irishman. This case lasted in the New York State Supreme Court from 1995 to 2015. I miss it, it was so much fun. Story 2. I'll give you one older one that I've posted about before. Someone is fired from her job because of failure to comply with tasks and is denied unemployment. Our defense is that she was pregnant. My client told me some other crazy that was going on at the workplace. Discovery confirmed what my client told me, that her workplace was a front for a prepper compound and that they were demanding she do military-style drills while pregnant. Unemployment still denied. Thanks, NC. 2 of my current caseload, I have a pending trial that includes allegation of an assault with a deadly weapon. The deadly weapon in question is a 20-box fan. Allegedly the box fan was swung around via the electric cable like a flail before someone was struck in the head. My first reaction to was pretty simple: where can I buy a box fan with a cable that's strong? Story 3. Not a lawyer, but work at a law firm. There's a case where a crazy lattice neighbor was allowed to have chickens in their yard, so she bought pigs, and the HMA or city stepped in and made her get rid of them. It was a suburban area. In retaliation, this lady buys 5,000 chickens from Tyson and unleashed them into her half-acre backyard. The chickens all die, obviously. She sued the trucking company that brought the chickens for defective chickens and negligent infliction of emotional distress because her daughter had to view the gore of 5,000 dead chickens in her backyard. She was pro-AC, of course. Story 4. Defective vape rig exploded in a guy's pocket and burned his penis off of his body. The settlement was very large. Discovery and reviewing medical records was extremely graphic and disheartening. I cannot imagine the anguish this man went through. Living without a penis from age 30 onwards would be an absolute nightmare. Story 5. Not a lawyer, but one of the car dealerships my dad worked for had a commercial in the 80s where they used a guy dressed up in a gorilla outfit, and the dealership had a whole jungle theme. In one of the commercials they said, like, come down and get a new whatever car it was for 10,000 bananas. Some guy showed up with a truck full of 10,000 bananas the next week and wanted the car. It ended up in court and the banana guy won from it being deemed false advertisement. Story 6. Every lawyer worth his or salt has a pro-SE plaintiff story. All of them are probably the lawyer's weirdest. Mine is no different. Pro-SE plaintiff sued an engineer who performed a home inspection following severe winds in Texas and wrote a report for the insurer that no wind damage occurred. She sued the engineer. Now, no lawyer would take the case because it was frivolous and lawyers get sanctioned for filing frivolous lawsuits. So she filed it herself. In that petition, she outlined a ceiling fan coming loose and killing her cat that she had a summer wardrobe that got soot on it from. I have no idea the name of her dog. She also said that sometimes her dog would act up and she would roll up a newspaper and teach her dog a lesson. But rest assured, she loved her dog, that she was a good Christian woman, and sang in her church her favorite color was pink, and 63 other pages of facts that, as you have guessed, have absolutely nothing to do with wind or engineering. Her case was dismissed because she did not attach an affidavit Texas requires when you sue an engineer. She did not let that go. Nope, she filed an appeal. She lost that appeal. She filed a petition to the Supreme Court, alleging that the Court of Appeals had no idea what they were doing, that they were super corrupt and in league with a trial court judge to deprive her of her rights. The Supreme Court denied to get her review. She then filed about 6 more insane things with the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals before they threatened to hold her in contempt if she filed anything else of a frivolous nature. So some $50,000 in legal fees and a year of time later. There was a final end to it all. Legal fees would have only been $3,500 or so if we ended with a dismissal. This is why any lawyer worth his or salt would much prefer to deal with another lawyer on the other side. The insane amount of unnecessary legal fees expended in dealing with pro-SE plaintiffs is egregious. Yes, they are easy cases to win. But they take a lot of effort that, frankly, I'd rather spend on Reddit or something. Story 7. NYC teacher has to go to jury duty. While going through security, his backpack is found to have a cigarette box stuffed with 20 glassine envelopes of heroin. Because he has tenure, he is entitled to a hearing where he is obviously fired. He files a lawsuit to get the termination reversed, and succeeds. Thank God for appeals. Our appeal wins and the decision is reversed, so the heroin addict thankfully is not teaching your kids. Edit: here are 2 articles from the Post, and the headlines are what you'd expect if you're a John Mulaney fan. Junkie high school teacher who brought heroin to court loses appeal. Jury duty. Dope busted for bringing heroin to court. Story 8. I had a case where a drug dealer client referred another drug dealer my way for representation on his drug dealing charges. This is all quite some time ago and largely contained in police reports and courtroom testimony, so there's nothing privileged here. He comes to my office, we sit down and exchange pleasantries, and he starts to spin out his yarn. He starts by saying, I don't know if you know this, but you're kind of a big deal. I say with a bit of a wink and a nod, exactly. He says, dead serious. I die a little on the inside. He goes on to tell me that he and his wife were preparing to go on a vacation down to Vegas, but before heading to the airport they decided that they needed to wash their dog and eat some magic mushrooms. Apparently the dog escaped from the shower and broke their glass shower door, which left a huge bleeding gash on my client's arm. Seeing that they were to be late to the airport, They threw everything they needed into a suitcase, did a line of blow, and headed off. At the airport, TSA notices my client acting suspiciously in the security line, in that he is bleeding from an open wound and gnashing his jaw like he's working through a pack of big league chew in one go. They take him aside and search his luggage. Inside they find 10 to 20K of loose cash and a pile of blood-covered clothes, as well as an apothecary bag full of uppers, downers, ciders, and everything else you would need for a trip to Vegas. In the little security detention area, my client decides that he's hot and he takes his pants off. For some reason this also necessitates him to stand on the bench where he should be sitting. This is how the Real police found him on the handoff from TSA. So we're back in my office now. This guy is buttoned up, white collar, long black high-quality trench, sober disposition, besides the incredibly obvious cocaine-induced narcissism. "I want to take this to the mat," he exclaimed, fueled by righteous indignation. "I need you to beat this for me. You see, the problem with narcissism, true, unmedicated, cocaine-fueled narcissism, is that it is impossible for the narcissist to be wrong. It is incredibly difficult to represent someone like this." Eventually I got him a sweetheart of a plea deal that I had to twist his arm into taking. Quantities were for personal use, etc. Do some treatment, everything goes away. There is one standout moment from a conversation he decided to have with the judge during one court appearance. "Are you employed, sir?" asked the judge. To which my client replied, "Yes, I'm an off-paper partner in a restaurant. Whatever that means, sure doesn't sound like you're doing anything illegal there." The judge just rolled his eyes and let it go. One more rich junkie. About a year later the guy got picked up again. Not quite as dramatic this time. Motor vehicle stop for poor driving. Found tons of drugs and loose bullets in the car, just sort of rolling around on the floor. Client ended up firing me when I recommended that he get some actual treatment. End of story. Not sure how it all turned out for him. Story 9. The day I learned that not everything on Jerry Springer is fake. I was a prosecutor for a couple of years. I was prosecuting a woman stripper who hit another woman hooker in the head with a meat cleaver several times. The defendant worked as a stripper. She lived with a man who was a pimp. He looked like the stereotype you see in the movies. The woman that got hit with the meat cleaver was one of his prostitutes. The pimp was having relations with hooker and stripper at the same time. Thus there was some bad blood. Well, they get invited to be on Jerry Springer and they all agree to go. Hug fight happens. We are talking multiple fights where clumps of hair are coming out. Stripper tells hooker, on the Jerry Springer show, that if hooker ever comes around the house again that stripper will kill hooker. Well, you guessed it. Hooker comes by the house when they get back. Stripper hits hooker with a butcher's knife in the head, several times. Hooker lives. Stripper gets convicted of aggravated battery. Note, I did not do the charging in the office, so another attorney charged the defendant with aggravated battery rather than attempted murder. Court reporters are probably the calmest people you will meet in a courtroom. They rarely show emotions. The court reporter taking the plea was very attractive. During the entire pleas hearing, the pimp was staring at her, the court reporter, the entire time. It was so bad, I was getting creeped out. The court reporter bolted from the courtroom the moment the hearing was over because she was completely grossed out by the dude. After the attack, but before the plea hearing, they got invited back to appear on the Springer show. They went 2 more times. It was an absolute show, only appeared on the Too Hot for TV videos. Somewhere around here, I have the old VHS copy of the 3 appearances. Story 10. When I was a baby lawyer, one of our clients received a subpoena for business records from a pro-per-plaintiff PPP, a plaintiff who's representing himself or herself in litigation. The litigation was in connection with a business dispute that was headed toward mediation. We were involved because the PPP formerly worked for our clients and decided to leave and take some business with him. After he left, he got into a business dispute with one of the customers he took with him and decided to subpoena business records from his old employer, my client, to help with his case and countersuit. The PPP would send a demand letter a week and came to my office a few times to meet. He was pretty aggressive and threatening in all of our interactions, but most pro-SE or pro-per litigants are, so I wasn't overly concerned. Given that our interests were aligned, I worked closely with the attorney representing the customer who was directly involved in the litigation. He was an older, well-respected attorney in town. Fast forward a couple of months and I get a call from a friend at the older attorney's firm. Unsurprisingly, the PPP lost to the mediation on both his claims and the counterclaims made by the customer. Apparently, after the mediation was over, he went out to his car, grabbed a gun and shot both the older attorney and the CEO of the customer who was attending the mediation. He then went on the run from the police. I think the total amount at stake was around 20,000, really senseless. As soon as I learned about the shooting, I alerted our building security to be on the lookout for the PPP. He was found the next morning with a self-inflicted gunshot in a parking lot. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the police department who said my address and the address of the CEO of my client was in the PPP's car. Not sure why I needed to know that information, but whatever. Shortly after that, I decided to switch to transactional work. Story 11. A long time also I used to do some relationship property work. Who gets what stuff after a couple splits up. In one case I represented the woman, her ex-partner was self-represented, and he was totally crazy. He used to write long letters to my firm, addressed to the managing partner who was a commercial lawyer, not a litigator, so he had nothing to do with the case. The letters always explained at some length that he was physically perfect, over 6 feet tall, and a genius WTH an IQ of 150, and that he would unleash the dogs of war and crush us all if we opposed him. Speaking of dogs, one of the main aspects of his case is that he said that after he and my client split up he bought a dog. Then the dog died in a car crash because he was so sad after the breakup that he crashed his car, so now my client owed him money for the 3 years worth of dog food Head supposedly bought. He used to ring me up and scream at me over the phone, Head get naked and throw rocks at his neighbor's property. My client was terrified of him, and even I used to peer out of the elevator before leaving work at night in case he was waiting for me. The file was closed after he got drunk and choked to death on his own vomit at a party. Edit: I should add that while naked and throwing rocks at the neighboring property, he at all times sported an erection, which the rock throwing was intended to draw attention to. Story 12. This middle-aged, alcoholized woman died in bed one day. Her husband had sort of given up on her, just letting her do her thing, sleep in and go to the store to buy a carton of white wine every day. She would then lay in bed and drink a gallon of wine every single day. He came home and found her unconscious on the bed. When she wouldn't wake up he described her as cold and sorta stiff. He raised her to a sitting position and tried to give her some water, but it all spilled down her gown. He proceeded to call Thea's son, who came straight away. They didn't know what to do with her, so they carried her out, sat her in the car, taking care to fasten her seatbelt. They then drove to the ER and the husband went to the reception and said, "My wife sits in the car, dead." Cue personnel running on the double, hauling the long dead, wet wife from the car and trying to revive her. Case was about indecency with a corpse but was of course closed due to lack of mens rea. I've worked on many strange cases, but this one kinda sticks out to me because it is both funny and sad, and because even if it would normally be a crime feeding a corpse and driving it around, it was done in confusion and out of love for this poor woman. Story 13. Not a lawyer, but I know a guy who was interning in a law firm, and he ended up getting sued by one of the top lawyers at the firm for damages over a lost case folder. The lawyer ended up having to drop the suit a few days later when he discovered that, in the process of moving into a new office, he had just left the missing folder in his old office. This was apparently also a rite of passage, and just about everybody who works at the firm had been sued by this lawyer at some point. I guess he hadn't been fired because they knew it would be a total nightmare. Story 14. Not a lawyer yet, but I have an amazing job as a secretary in a law firm while I'm studying. I get to read our cases. Favorite current one: the new client comes in, dressed flashy and very inappropriately. She works for a bank, almost like a prostitute. Hey, race the situation, and it's weird as she was in a relationship with one of the bank's executives. The boss of her boss, all of a sudden, one of her co-workers, who apparently had put his eyes on her for a little while, made a move. She shot him down, but he wouldn't give up. She then asked her boyfriend, the executive bloke, to get this man to stop, but he refused, so she dumped him to get back at her. The executive then started dating our client's best friend. She now wants to file for harassment claims. Everything about this case is weird, as in the people involved all behave like middle schoolers. Story 15. Not a lawyer, but my uncle is. There was a house with 4 lesbians living in it. 1, 2 and 3, 4 are couples. 1, 3 start cheating on 2, 4 together. So while 1, 3 are in the bedroom together, 2 forget in a car, I think it really was a Subaru, and drive it into the bedroom. No one was hurt. I think my uncle represented the homeowner's insurance company. Story 16. One time I defended an apartment complex who was sued by a blind tenant for violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. Plaintiff's gripe was she wanted a parking spot right in front of her door. Obviously, plaintiff was not capable of driving and didn't have a car. She wanted the parking spot in case friends came over. She didn't want them to have to walk as far to get to her apartment. The part that made it really weird was she already had an assigned parking spot like 3 feet away from the one she was demanding. She wanted the absolute closest parking spot to her door, or it was discrimination, even though she didn't own and couldn't operate a car. Story 17. Not a lawyer, but did paralegal work for about a year. There was a lady we represented who was flying down the highway, probably about 90 in. Cop drives up behind her. Dash cam shows her swerving all over the place. He lights her up. She pulls over. He walks up and says, "Hello ma'am, how are you doing? Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" She is obviously clueless. He says, "Well, it looks like your tabs registration sticker are expired. Have you been drinking tonight?" Rest of the stop goes par for the course. This lady is about 51 and maybe 100 pounds when she's soaking wet with change in her pockets. She blows 29, almost 4 times the legal limit. Well, unfortunately, expired tabs was a secondary offense, meaning they can't pull you over just for that. They could give you a ticket for that after pulling you over for things like speeding, failure to maintain a lane, failure to signal, etc. We motion to have the case dismissed and it's thrown out. Had the cop said anything like you were going pretty fast, you were swerving anything, but because he stated the purpose as an illegal stop, the case was thrown out completely. I just worked on an amazing case recently. A woman and her buddy decided to try in some crazy position where he was apparently holding her arms behind her back. He falls on top of her and hurts her shoulder. She got a rotor cuff tear. She sued him and I represent his insurance company, so we stepped in. TIL homeowners insurance will cover accidents from. I wonder if you have to request that coverage specifically. Story 18. Craziest cases are those sovereign citizen people who refuse to acknowledge the authority of the trial court. They create this word salad about the Constitution, maritime law, corporate entities, etc. Another time a woman wanted to charge her ex-boyfriend for stealing her cat. Her evidence: the cat was missing for 2 days. When she returned, she smelled like cigarette smoke. Ex is a smoker, ergo, he stole the cat. Story 19. I'm not a lawyer, but my mom is and I worked for her for a summer digitizing her files. One case I read about sticks out in my mind. So my mom is primarily a divorce lawyer, but does handle some criminal cases. The case in question is a family law case. As part of the process to digitize her files, I need to read through them so I can title them properly and organize them adequately. So this case is about a lesbian couple, wife and wife, who are getting a divorce. They adopted 2 kids together. This in itself is not weird, but both the kids they adopted are special needs kids. I don't remember what exactly was wrong with them, but it's safe to say that they will likely never live entirely independently and would need to stay home or be in group homes, maybe work an easy job like fast food or whatever. So this case was a custody case. But it wasn't that both moms wanted primary custody, it was that neither of the moms wanted primary custody. I didn't read the entirety of the file, but I think the resolution ended up being 5050 split custody. Story 28. Couple of weirdos spring to mind. I was a young lawyer prosecuting in Texas. In Texas, a person is entitled to a jury trial for every criminal offense, everything from a seatbelt ticket to first-degree murder. I was prosecuting misdemeanors, and generally, we would try to get through most of the docket in the morning and try a case in the afternoon. We're not talking about complex cases here, mostly traffic offenses and city ordinance violations. Jury selection generally started about 1 and most trials were done by 5. So, I'm in court one day and the one particular pro-SE defendant bubbles up to the top of the trial list. I forget what he allegedly did, but he insisted on a trial where his main defense was that he was a sovereign citizen, and as such, he was not subject to the jurisdiction of that or, in fact, any court. When we started jury selection, the only people in the courtroom were court personnel, the defendant and the prospective jurors. Just like pretty much every other trial I ever conducted there, they were boring and you didn't stick around to watch if you could find something else to do. So, we pick our jury and I put on the state's case. The defendant tries to muddle through and the jury finally gets the case around 4 p.m. or so, and I turn around for the first time in hours and realize that there were probably 20 or so HBD officers just sitting in the audience. I walked out in the audience to a cop I knew and asked him why they were all just sitting in on a boring routine trial. He said the defendant had sent threatening letters to the judge, had attempted to sue her in his own court and had attempted to place a lien on her house. They were there to make sure he didn't try any funny business. The jury came back with a guilty verdict and ordered him to pay a fine. Okay, great, normal, everyday trial. Well, this guy who had argued for a couple of hours that he was not part of any sort of government and that he was free from all that, turned to the clerk and asked if they would accept a credit card for payment. The other one that comes to mind is a deposition when I was still a law student. The firm I was working for represented a bus company that took senior citizens to casinos in the area. One lady, who looked just like Aunt Bee from Mayberry, fell getting off of the bus. She sued and was being deposed. One of the lawyers had a list of doctors that he was going through with her and she was identifying what they treated her for. One for high blood pressure, one for her heart condition, one for her bad knee, and on and on. He finally gets to the last doctor and asks her what that one is treating her for. Oh, him, she says, he's trying to get me off of weed. Story 21. I was a prosecutor at the time. A parent found messages on their teen's phone indicating a boy had given another boy at a Boy Scout campout in exchange for a Fortnite game pack, a popular video game with kids. It gets worse, 2 other boys watched. Interviews were done. The boy that received had been bragging about it at school. After meeting with parents, none of them wanted us to prosecute. The kid that gave the had parents with a business in the community. Story 22. I'm a family law attorney, and I once had to defend a client in a domestic violence restraining order case in which his ex-wife claimed that she was legitimately fearful for her safety because my client engaged in, and liked to have with livestock. Every aspect of the case was a complete shit show that I would not have believed had I not been involved in the case. Story 23. I started my career in juvenile court, handled a lot of abuse cases, some were out of control, but one in particular, mom and stepdad used and sold heroin, there was physical and abuse, and all of it was verified by findings from child services and a guardian ad litem, not to mention the mountain of evidence and witnesses. Mom goes to the bishop of her Mormon church and next thing I know child services is pushing unsupervised parent time even though I have a court order forbidding it. The kid's teacher was sneaking her in to see him at school because she was a member of mom's ward. Social workers are leaving him alone with her during supervised parent time because she's surely a good mom. She suddenly got this very high-priced lawyer who, at one point in court, calls me out on not being Mormon. The kid's development rapidly backslides. After that it just evolved into this surreal and insane fight. Like I was the villain personally. Her husband threatened the lives of my witnesses and they started dropping out and I couldn't get anyone to support them. Her husband blocked me in the court parking lot one day and looked me in the eye while brandishing a shotgun. When I finally left he tried following me but I lived far, far away. At one point in a hearing on the protective order, and the attorney for child services gets riled up and screams as loud as she can, this family is being reunited whether Uteraptor likes it or not. I didn't like it, and they won't be. But sweet tap dancing Moses, it should not have been that hard or horrible. Story 24. Not a lawyer, but work for a law firm. We do a lot of divorces. We had some people spend a bunch of money on cat custody. Who will get the cat? We had another client that same week spend a lot of money on hat custody. Client had a really sweet hat, but his ex wanted it. We also had a stalker of a celebrity call in and try to get a case started for custody of the celeb's kid. Are you married? Spiritually married, yes, but not legally married. Are you on the birth certificate? No. Is it your kid? not technically. Turns out the only time this person met the celebrity is going to their shows, trying to sneak backstage, and getting kicked out. Needless to say, we did not take the case. Story 25. So many. Taxi driver who leased a car, scraped the side against a concrete barrier. Rather than report it, per policy, the driver washed it and turned it back in. Turns out it was the second time the driver had done that. They decided not to lease to that driver anymore. The driver secretly recorded that conversation. The driver then filed 2 lawsuits. When I got the case, the driver told me that I was going to be shocked to hear how poorly the driver was treated. I listened to a totally normal person say they were sorry they couldn't lease any more cars because it happened twice. No yelling or anything. Yeah, got the cases dismissed. Also, suing a neighbor because the HMA made them fix violations in their backyard. Lots of cases where we get medical records from people that are drug-seeking or had pre-existing conditions that they want someone else to pay for, claiming huge injuries from tiny accidents. People doing dumb things on off-road vehicles then suing their friend and ruining relationships, all because it wasn't personal. I thought your insurance would pay me. Same thing with playing sports with friends. If it has a ball in it, you might get hit. Story 26. Not a lawyer, but my uncle is. He had one case where a lady let her dogs loose in a bed bath and beyond to attack a lady who was suing her, then at the trial brought a giant stuffed dog with her for no reason. Story 27. Lawyer in the hospitality industry. My firm had a case where plaintiffs sued our client because the plaintiffs claimed they brought their baby into our client's pool, another baby shat in the pool, and their baby got salmonella. As a result, there was no evidence that the other baby even had salmonella. Their baby ended up being fine with no lasting health effects, and we won on summary judgment. Story 28. Not a lawyer, but work in public liability claims. A few years back, a guy accidentally ran over a 3-year-old boy while driving into a fast food restaurant parking lot. It was suspected he was looking at his phone or otherwise distracted, but the police couldn't prove it, so he wasn't ultimately convicted of negligent driving. Once he was cleared, he tried to sue the restaurant for psychological damages on the basis of their parking lot being badly designed and providing insufficient visibility and speed management. Ultimately, he lost. There was simply nothing wrong with the parking lot, so his claim didn't have any merits, but it pisses me off that he tried to get compensation for killing someone else's child. Story 29. I prosecuted a horse murder. The charges were for dogs let run at large causing damage. This guy's 2 pit bulls got out and attacked a neighbor's horse. They tore the poor thing's face to shreds. The horse belonged to a little boy who had saved up his allowance and raised and sold chickens to pay for part of the horse. The charges were misdemeanors, and the law didn't require the owner to know the dogs were dangerous to hold him criminally liable. I had to write a brief on strict liability for misdemeanors and ended up winning. The next big battle was the restitution hearing, where we had to convince the judge of the value of the horse. Defendant was sentenced to 50 hours of community service at a horse rescue and had to pay $7,500 to the family for the value of the horse. Story 30. My mom is a lawyer and comes back with some pretty crazy stories, including but not limited to, one, the most recent one today, a client she's defending is getting charged for shitting on a bus, then asking a 10-year-old girl if she wanted to have 2. A man who went around multi-story parking garages throwing his own on unsuspecting people. He literally had a van full of test tubes of his. 3. An ex-military guy around 20 or so who went to an extremely posh private school, has very high profile. Family is being investigated for threatening to cut his friend's toes fingers off with pliers, and actually waterboarding him over a 10 watch that his friend never actually took. Police found it between the couch cushions. I have a few more, but those are the ones that immediately come to mind, haha. Story 31. I am working this case on appeal. So the father failed to give financial support to his children and estranged spouse. In the Philippines, it could be classified as economic abuse. We argued on appeal it isn't a form of violence against. So the wife and children, the case, father was convicted. You know what is funny? The wife and children signed a document withdrawing from the case after conviction. Like, WTF? Why only now? You should know the consequences. You wasted time to testify and you retract. Story 32. Clerk to DUI trial where the accused presented the red-headed Irishman stereotype defense. Dude crashed his car wasted at like noon on a Sunday a mile from his house. Not guilty. He testified saying he went home after he hit a rock to look for his dog that had jumped out of the car. He was upset about the crash, so he had a shot and a beer before returning to the scene. He was found guilty of evading responsibility for hitting a mailbox and received a $150 fine. Story 33. I'm not a lawyer but was a legal assistant. This woman tried to sue her former employer. She was a live-in nanny, as a tenant because she was terminated for being old. Turns out, she often disappeared for 2 weeks at a time, leaving the family without childcare, only to come back weeks later claim she was a tenant because she technically lived there for 3 months. The families didn't want to deal with the lawsuits, and other than the weird, she was a damned good nanny, but after the second time she was often fired. She then wouldn't file an age discrimination lawsuit. She went on to do this to several families under different names. We looked her up via a friend the firm had on retainer who was also a PI. She was a textbook vexatious litigant, and always appeared pro per then never appeared again after the first hearings, often an ex parte hearing. All of this is wild because filing a lawsuit where I am at the time was like 400. The prevailing question after our research on her was why these parents did not run background checks on people caring for their most precious babies. Maybe because she was an old grandma type, but I will never know. Few. I heard a lot of crazy working in employment law. Story 34. Not a case I personally worked on, But for those of you with a Westlaw subscription, check out Finchgrant v. Lang, 2014 WL 3888124S, DGA, 2014, in which the plaintiff sued the defendant for, among other things, turning his inside out. The defendant was allegedly doing so because of the plaintiff's race. The plaintiff accordingly moved the court to have defendant hung limp and in front of people. Story 35. Not a lawyer, but I once read an application for a peace bond in which the applicant was complaining that his roommate, who has since moved out, had been breaking house rules. The applicant was requesting protection, no contact, etc., as Hesha feared for his safety. Example of rules being broken: the roommate had cleaned the applicant's dishes without using the proper soap, the roommate cleaned the place without the applicant consent, etc. I was reading the justifications and thinking to myself, I'd pay that person to be my roommate. Story 36 didn't work on it, but I'll leave this gem here. Story 37 didn't work on the case, but the public defender that was on it showed me the prenuptial pact signed by both parties. 1-1H mini monovaginal oral, with a maximum of 4H, without a dog. Don't ask me why 2-2H max of spanking, 3 all the cusses a load. And some others with no translation to English. 4, a detailed schedule of the times they were going to have, with a minimum of 16 times in a month, each day a differente whole 5. The husband had to pay her healthcare bill among other stuff. The list was longer, but I could only remember these 5. The fun part was that they were filing a divorce because the husband didn't keep with the prenup pact, and the judge had to ask which clause he had broken. Story 38. Anytime a pro-se opposing party is involved with the posse comitatus, in divorce court, determining custody and visitation with pets is always amusing, and kind of sad. Story 39. I help victims of natural disasters access federal recovery grants to rebuild, repair, flood-proof their homes. There's a law that protects tenants who are displaced by their landlord's voluntary participation in a federal program. Essentially, the landlord is responsible for paying reasonable costs associated with moving, as well as any amount they pay in rent above the cost of rent at the landlord's place. The program I work with most told my client that they'd have to vacate their house for a few months so they could do the construction. Clients moved out as requested, but for whatever reason, the program didn't start construction for 5 months, so the house was just sitting vacant. During that 5 months, some squatters had moved in. They'd been there for the months when the program found them, so under our city's laws, they're tenants with all of the legal rights as if they had a lease, which made my client responsible for their moving costs and anything they paid in rent above the 0 the squatters were then paying. I got the city to cover most of the cost through a stupid loophole about housing unit density.